1. This happened while on vacation in the Bahamas when I was 14 years old. I was in a resort, and being the teenage paranormal enthusiast I was, I decided to pack a Ouija board on the trip. I know. I was staying in a resort and sharing a room with a friend, and my brother and my friend and I decided to use the Ouija. We were messing around with it until a very strong force begins moving the pointer around the board in a circular motion. My friend and I freeze as we were not expecting this sudden change in force, and watched as it spelled Ursula. The board then proceeded to spell out daughter, arson, message. I then asked if she wanted to relay a message to us. It pointed to no. I then asked if she wanted to send a message to this Ursula. It pointed to yes. The message was, tell Ursula mommy loves, which we deduced meant that tell my daughter Ursula I love her. I asked about the arson comment, and it spelled I die, which we then deducted that her mother had recently died in arson. My last question was, how do I find Ursula? It spelled resort. We woke my brother up and told him what happened, and he was just as curious as us. We vowed to find her at that resort in the morning. Meekly, I went up to the front desk at the reception and asked, is there someone who works here named Ursula? I'm not sure what I was expecting, but the woman shot me a look and said, yeah. But she left for her mother's funeral in Nassau a few days back. This sent chills up my spine. I decided to write her a letter saying her mother loves her and is with her, and asked if they would give it to her. I'm not sure it was the right thing to do, but I was stumped. Fast forward 2 years, my family and I go back to the same resort. I'm sitting for breakfast, and a woman pours us water. I look at her name tag, which reads Ursula. At that point, however, I'm too shy to bring it up to her, and perhaps she might not want to talk about it with a complete stranger, which is understandable. After this, I stopped using the Ouija board as it freaked me out. Ursula is not a common name, especially with that spelling, and I can only hope if she did indeed receive my message, it was well received. 2. Years ago, I developed a pretty strong drug addiction. Not any particular drug, but all drugs. I just loved drinking and doing drugs. It took me a few years to come to terms and realize I had a very bad problem. In 2009, I had an overdose and almost died. After I left the hospital, my parents put me in rehab. I did a 60-day program in Nashville and started to read the Bible and try and figure out what I could do to remain sober. I decided after I went to treatment that when I got out, I was to enter another program, kind of like a halfway house. It was in a house with 8 other men. We were to stay in this program for 1 year. I arrived at the house, and this is where the problem started. I have always been very skeptical. Never really believed in God or the devil. I have always just been a realist and been very scientific in that regard. I walked into the house, was an old-style house, in the suburban area of Nashville. If I had to guess, I would say the house was maybe 40s or 50s, so it's not super old. This location had housed addicts like me for the past 30 years in this program. I was shown to my room and unloaded my stuff. Once I got all settled in and got my stuff together, all seemed to be going in the right direction. I worked this program for about 3 weeks before I noticed anything going on. Each room had 2 men in it. I was on the top floor and had a roommate, we'll call him John. One night I was laying in bed and having difficulty getting to sleep. I always sleep well. Drifting in and out of sleep, I started having some really dark dreams. Images of me dying, and people around me dying. Being the skeptic that I am, I just got up, grabbed a drink, and went back to bed, this time falling asleep. The following few nights, things started to happen that I couldn't explain. Night number 2 after the dream. I awoke suddenly, not sure of the time, and couldn't move, I couldn't talk, and it felt like there was something standing on my chest, I was completely paralyzed. It was pitch dark in the room, but I couldn't help but feel like something was in there with me. I couldn't think of anything but to ask God to help. This is really out of character for me being an atheist. I felt this horrible feeling of helplessness go away, and I went back to sleep. The following day, I couldn't get that thought out of my head. The feeling of powerlessness and vulnerability. I have never felt that way before. I knew of cases of sleep paralysis, and after some research, I determined that this must be what it is. Night number 3. After thinking more and more about what happened the night before, I had a feeling of fear going to bed that night. I decided to lay in bed and read my Bible. Just flipped it open and was reading and trying to fall asleep, reading the Bible. It started getting late, and my roommate was already fast asleep. So I turned the lamp off and put my Bible up. Laying in bed, staring over at the direction of my roommate. Now the room without any lights in it was completely pitch dark. My eyes open. I am laying there just staring into the darkness. I felt pretty good and started to feel myself giving in to the sleep. Just as I thought about closing my eyes, I looked down, and in the dark could make out what looked like my roommate sitting on the end of his bed. "John? John?" I said to him, assuming he was not feeling good or something, and got no reply. I flipped the light on and he was asleep. Thinking to myself that I was seeing things in the dark, I turned the light back off, laying there in the dark, eyes aimed directly where he was sitting before. I kept looking, and as my eyes adjusted to the dark, I see again this dark figure sitting on the bed. I asked again, "John?" And suddenly the figure stood up. The figure was completely black, and about a foot taller than John is. What made me afraid wasn't the figure, but was the feeling I felt inside. In my head, I could almost hear what it was saying. Not actually audible sounds in my ears, but in my mind, this thing was pure fear. There was an overwhelming feeling of dread. I knew in my heart that this thing wanted to hurt me. It stood there for a good 3 minutes just staring back at me. Then suddenly it started to creep forward towards me. At this point, I flipped the light on and sat straight up in my bed. The room felt very still and cold. I could feel chills all over my body and felt like I was having trouble breathing. I slept the rest of the night with the lights on, and the following day, I checked out of the program and went home. After I got home, I relapsed and couldn't stay clean. I finally gave my life to God and got clean 4 years ago, and haven't picked up again since. I have always remembered that encounter, and after thinking and doing a lot of research, I believe it was a demonic encounter. 3. This experience takes place in my boyfriend's house. We had been having a bit of a tiff. Tensions were high, it was late at night, and I can't even remember what the disagreement was about. Something trivial and insignificant, no doubt. It usually is. George and I were in his room upstairs, the smaller of the 2 bedrooms, with the other belonging to his parents. There's only a small square of carpet outside both bedroom doors, before the stairs lead you down to a door leading to the kitchen. Each bedroom is raised up a step, so you step down onto the landing. We were in bed, TV off, room in total darkness, save for a sliver of moonlight coming in from his window on the right of the room. His parents were both in bed asleep and snoring. As we were both in fairly sour moods, we were quiet and not saying a word to each other. On his single bed, we were both facing out into the room and the door. He never closes that door fully, mostly because he can't due to the dressing gowns and scarves hanging on the back of it. I've always hated the peak of darkness beyond the gap in the door. Always. Just as the mood was calming, and I was thinking of what to say to make the situation right again, we were both jarred by the unmistakable sound of someone stepping down from Georgie's parents' bedroom and onto that square piece of carpet outside our door. Unmistakable. George instantly flipped over on the bed and scooted as close to me as he could get, his duvet over our heads faster than I could blink. Once our faces were so close together that our breaths were muggy and mingled between us. I could barely breathe. Both our hearts were racing. "The fuck was that?" George whispered to me, and I could tell from the wobble in his voice that he had tears in his eyes. Sheer fear and panic had forced him to talk, but it did the opposite with me. My voice was plucked from my throat, replaced by dread. I put my arm over him beneath the covers and tugged his body closer. Then I strained my ears to listen to what was beyond the door. The floor creaked again. I could still hear both his parents snoring. There was a gap in the duvet that would allow me to peer at that dark space between the door and the wall, but there was no way I was going to look. I kept my eyes squeezed shut and listened. Faintly, there was a rustle of fabric from the back of the door. I shuddered against George and bit my lip so hard I broke skin. Thoughts were racing through my brain. If there's something there, we can't run. We can't hide. The only other exit is a huge fire escape window, blocked by a desk and clutter. We can't move. Please go away. Please go away. Go the fuck away. This isn't happening. Minutes passed. Maybe they were seconds, actually. I don't know how long we remained still and barely breathing, huddled together in a sweaty tangle of arms and legs, with no intention of pulling away the duvet for air, in case something was waiting for us to just look and see. I didn't want to see. We never heard any more steps. Nothing going downstairs, nothing going back up the step into George's parents' room, and we stayed there in our petrified states, with our arms around each other until we eventually fell asleep. 4. In the summer of 2006, I fell in with an interesting group of friends. They were all obsessed with the paranormal, and it had always been an interest of mine as well. One of the group had heard of a graveyard about an hour away that was nestled into a secluded patch of forest. Naturally, being young and stupid, we decided to get some flashlights and head that way. It took hours to find it. It was unmarked and hidden, down a dirt road with nothing else for miles. We parked the car and got out. There was a path leading into the woods, with the graveyard at the very end. It was small, only about 30 headstones in total, surrounded by trees and forgotten. The latest death date we could find was 1923. Once we were there, we really didn't know what to do next, so we just sort of milled around looking at headstones. It was incredibly quiet, no forest noises at all. We could hear our own breathing. Suddenly, a woman started screaming, and it sounded like it was right in our midst. At first it was just short, loud screams, but then it melted into words. We could hear her begging, "Please!" and "No!" We all froze. I started to stumble backwards towards the path and the car, but two of my friends started towards the woods to look for the woman. The screams ended abruptly, and the hair stood up on the back of my neck. My whole body was drenched in fear sweat. There was a feeling of anticipation, like the static before a lightning storm. Then a gunshot rang out, making all of us scream. We took off running collectively towards the car. We jumped in and slammed the doors, and as we reversed away, the headlights caught a woman stumbling down the path. My friend yelled to stop backing up, and leaned out the window, calling to the woman. He started to get out of the car, but she disappeared while we were talking to her. After that, we got the fuck out of there as fast as possible. I'd like to say we never went back, and that we learned a lesson. But we went back every other weekend for almost a year. A lot of weird things happened, but nothing as visceral as that terrifying first night. 5. First experience. The first time I experienced something paranormal was when I was 8 or 9 years old. My mother and I were staying at my grandma's house in Brooklyn, New York, for a weekend. The house isn't too old, and had one death when an old owner fell down the stairs and died in like the 50s or something. One morning I woke up at about 9 AM with the bedroom door open, directly in my field of view. As my eyes opened up more, I saw a male figure walk past the door towards the bathroom, assuming it was my grandpa, who was the only man in the house. I called his name a few times and got no response. After 30 seconds or so, I got up and walked towards the bathroom that the man had walked into. That's when I realized that there was nobody in there. I was confused and proceeded to look in the closet and behind the shower curtain, thinking that my grandpa might have been playing a prank on me. Then it dawned on me that there was nobody in there and whoever I saw walk in had vanished. That's when I freaked out and ran down 3 floors to find my mother and grandparents. Obviously, they didn't believe me and thought that I was dreaming. That's when I learned that some things happen that cannot be explained. Looking back, I suppose something strange could have happened, and I had a hallucination or a tail end of a dream. Although I didn't get up until like 30 seconds had passed. I know that I could have moved, and I talked, so I kind of doubt that it was sleep paralysis. Second experience. When I was 13, I took a tour of a historical house in Gettysburg with my family, when a cabinet door opened next to me by itself. I don't know what caused that, but I suppose that there's probably a logical explanation for that. Third experience, when I was 18. I was on vacation in Greece and had an American friend, I'll call him John, who had an open house there for our friend group. Long story. All my friends had already been staying there for much of the summer, but I had arrived there in late July. He had a very nice big house with a pool. Every teenager's dream party house, am I right? So the first night there I arrived at around 8 PM and reunited with some friends whom I hadn't seen in 7 years. Sometime around 9 or 10. I was alone, still sober, and getting my wallet from on top of the piano that was sitting in the big room. As I was taking my wallet off of the piano, I had the most vivid feeling that someone was right behind me. I turned around expecting to see one of my friends, but nobody was there. It was weird, but I didn't think much of it, and went back to my friends in the living room. The next day around 2 PM, I was alone outside, getting my shirt from beside the pool. Might have had 1 beer at that point, not sure. Again, I felt like someone was right behind me, but when I turned, nobody was there. I don't ever get this feeling, so it was kind of weird that I felt it twice in less than 24 hours. I never told any of the guys because, frankly, I didn't think it was that big of a deal, and that my mind was probably playing tricks on me. At around 4 PM, we were still sitting in the living room talking. I hadn't drank since that 1 beer at the pool. This is when one of my friends started saying this. I don't have an exact quote, but this is pretty much what he said. "Guys, I have to tell you something." All of us looked towards him curiously. "Whenever I'm in this house, I get the feeling that I'm being watched, and when we sleep in the bedrooms, I hear noises in the hallway." At which point, I brought up the 2 times since the night prior that I felt like someone was right behind me. This is when John, who owned the house, chimed in. "Alright guys, I didn't want to tell you guys because you'd get scared, but my house is haunted." All of us were like, "What the fuck?" He says, "Yeah, I've seen a ghost here a couple of times." He proceeded to tell us about how when he was a little younger, he had seen a little girl in his kitchen, across the room from the living room we were sitting in, and in his bedroom doorway. As we were talking about the house's haunting, I was sitting in a couch next to the corner of the room, and 2 other friends were sitting on a different couch that was next to mine in the corner. As I was talking, I heard a voice say something in my ear that sounded like an audible whisper. I was shook and immediately stopped talking and looked at my friends on the couch next to mine and could see in their eyes that they heard what I had heard. I loudly said, "Did you guys just hear that?" And those 2 had as well. I made sure nobody had played something off of their phone, and were dumbfounded. Unfortunately, because I was so focused on what I was saying at the time, my brain didn't process what the voice had said. My two friends, however, did hear it, and told each other to say what they heard at the same time. They did, and had heard the same thing. Sadly, I don't remember what they said that the voice had said, but all three of us heard a voice that came out of thin air, in a small space in the corner of the room, in between our two couches. To this day, I have no explanation for this. Fourth experience. The next time I had an experience at that house was when I was sleeping in a room with three guys at around 6 a.m. John gave one of us a spare key, and I didn't know that we were going to sleep there that night. We had just come in from a night of shenanigans around town. I had one beer around 5. My two friends were making kind of a big deal over two medium-sized wooden mannequin models that had been moved since we left earlier that night. They went from a typical arms to the side position to a Hitler Sieg Heil style pose, with their right arms parallel, pointing towards the side of the room with our beds. I didn't think much of it, but it was a little strange, since nobody had been in the house. As we were lying in our beds, we heard an extremely loud thud from 2 floors below us, like somebody had dropped a heavy box. But nobody else was in the home. We were getting a bit unsettled at this point. That's when I decided to plug in the rotating disco ball-like thing that was in the room, that makes the room look colourful. I lie back down, and after a couple of minutes, the lights went out on the machine, but it kept spinning. I got up, turned it off and on, and it was working again. I lie down, and 2 minutes later it did it again. Mind you, we never had a problem with this light thing before that night. I got pissed off, fixed it again, and sat back down. Not 15 minutes later, the light went out, but it kept spinning again. I tried turning it off and on again, but the light wasn't working at all. That's when I said fuck it, and turned it off, but the light kept rotating, even though I had turned the switch off. At this point, my friends and I were mildly freaked out. I pulled the plug out of the electric socket, and the thing kept rotating for around 15 seconds, which was really strange because it normally stops after like 1 or 2 when you turn it off. That's when we heard a thud noise down the hallway, next to the bedroom. At that point, all of us were too tired and creeped out to deal with this crap. So we left and slept at another friend's house, who lives 30 minutes away. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 47. Thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. I think I'm going to have to stop yelling at people that make noises while I'm trying to record. I think I'm wearing my throat out by doing it. Nothing to panic about, just a bit sore. Bit of a rest and I'll be fine. Not to worry. And the recording's done for the day anyway, so it's just editing and then make the videos. And also snacks. Okay, and with that I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.